Luke Vargas has been a guest on the show many times. He is United Nations Correspondent for Talk Radio News Service. Today he is joining me from Warsaw, Poland, where he is hanging out for the UN climate change talks. This is very, very exciting, Luke. How long have you been there, first of all? What is the point of these talks, and why Poland?
I've been here for a little over a week. The talks are 2 weeks long, and they conclude tomorrow. Most people say they'll exceed their 6 p.m. slated finish time and go into the early hours of Saturday. Here's a broad review of the point of these talks. This is the 19th round of global UN climate talks, and there are basically two goals here. The first is to try to create an agreement to replace the Kyoto protocols. Those are going to expire in 2020, and Ban Ki-moon at the UN has said he wants to have an agreement for the follow-up treaty, essentially, by the end of 2015. So that's one reason we're here. And the other reason is to create something called a loss and damage compensation mechanism. This is a way, essentially, for developed countries to gather funds together and dispense them to countries that are suffering from climate-related disasters that, you know, as much as they try to cut emissions and increase efficiency, they just can't do anything about. The Philippines and their typhoon is a perfect kind of example. So these are big global policy issues, but unfortunately, ever since these talks started, it's really been hard to think globally because so often very local and domestic issues here in Poland seem to have been distracting the media, myself included, and a lot of the delegates here, I think.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. What are some of those local issues that have been a distraction? I've been reading about some. And what was the reasoning for Poland as the location for these talks in the first place?
Well, one of the reasons maybe for putting them in Warsaw is because you've got this beautiful stadium. They hosted the European Football Championships a few years back here, and they've got good infrastructure for it. They've actually hosted these talks twice in 5 years. But this is interesting on the policy issue. I was fortunate enough to have enough time in the country here to go around and venture outside of the capital and see the Polish energy sector at work. It's a very visual industry. It's because 90% of Polish energy comes from coal. A lot of that from open pit mines and lignite mines, things that environmentalists hate. It's like the single worst type of energy extraction. And so outside of this city of Konin in Poland, and I have some footage from that region, I was not only able to visit the mines, but to see some of the surrounding communities and talk to local politicians and see what they say are some of the negative impacts of coal. We were shown lakes and areas where the water has really been drained out of the water table essentially because of the intensity of these mines. And as I've traveled around, I've learned the extent to which the political and legal mechanisms really aren't in place in this country for communities that are unhappy with the Polish national energy policy to object and to try to have their voices heard. So, this is a beautiful country. It's a country I'm very proud to have, some bloodlines here, and I'm proud that they were able to weather the economic crisis so well. But in many ways, I'm detecting that they've done so by pursuing economic growth, perhaps with very little regard for the environment. And in many ways, I think the environment and ecological concerns have taken the back seat in this country. And it's something that a lot of the delegates here, particularly those in civil society, have been really frustrated by.
So I want to get to how the Polish government is kind of managing this coal issue while they have all of these negotiators there. But before we get to that, in the U.S., the issue of energy is highly politicized among party lines, right? So traditionally speaking, the American right is more in favor of continuing fossil fuel energy sources and exploring them further, whereas the American left tends to be more for alternative energy. Is it as politicized there?
There are some party tensions, but really it just seems to be a gulf between the government policy and the will of the people. You look at the energy plans. There's a blueprint that was published in 2009 projecting Polish energy until 2030, and it says essentially we're only going to increase renewable energy share by 15% by 2020 and 16% by 2030. They really don't believe in the government in the popularity of renewable energy sources. But studies have been done recently polling the Polish population, and it shows that overwhelmingly people here have a very different opinion than the government. It's just that the government doesn't seem to be consulting the people in the areas where it says it's going to be constructing mines. So the gulf really is more between the populace and the government than between parties.
So then let's go to the issue of the Polish government. How are they addressing this at all in terms of we have climate talks going on and we're highly reliant upon some of the dirtiest forms of energy that in the world?
Well, this is where things, I think, get pretty weird. I've been a political junkie for a long time, and I'm used to sort of seeing when there's a story that could potentially generate bad headlines, that the government goes into overdrive. It hires a PR firm to spit out, good news stories and other things. And that really has kind of been the opposite here. The Polish government not only decided the prime minister sacked the environment minister yesterday in a cabinet reshuffling. He was the chair of these talks. He's actually in an office that you may be able to see behind me. So this not only kind of saps his mandate to be able to rule these talks, because he's no longer the environmental minister,
Right.
but at the same time, the government decided to host a coal conference in Warsaw on Monday and Tuesday of this week. And it just seems to be the opposite of doing good PR disaster mitigation. They really, unfortunately, those coal talks distracted the media. It got everyone talking about the wrong things. People say talks like this are good because, and it's even good when a story like this coal thing comes up, because it can put political pressure on the government to try to change their ways. Instead, the incoming environmental minister gave a speech yesterday saying, of course we love coal, but one thing that I'm going to champion during my tenure is the investment in shale gas, which will involve fracking here. So they've gone from coal to fracking, and essentially, I don't know how you could have botched this more. And it really makes you wonder whether it's wise to be moving these global talks from country to country every year. Maybe you should hold them in Copenhagen or something like that, where there are good energy policies. But at the very least, put them in a neutral site where there's no potential for a distraction like this, because it really seems to have distracted a lot of people from the focus, from the global perspective that is needed when you're trying to come to an international agreement like we are trying to do here.
Excellent stuff, Luke. Yeah, I've never been to Poland myself, although my grandfather on my mom's side was born in what it was Poland prior to World War II, now part of Belarusia. And interestingly enough, I'm actually working on getting my Polish citizenship, which you can do. Poland has a program where if you can trace your lineage to Poland, you can get a Polish passport and essentially have a full access to the EU. It's amazing.
Huh, we'll have to talk about that off the air.
We will. All right. Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, joining us from the UN climate change talks in Warsaw. Okay, Luke, excellent stuff, and we'll see you when you are back in the U.S.
Take care. Thanks a lot.